Disney makes being a princess look exciting and glamorous, but the origin stories behind Disney's most recent royals aren't nearly so much fun. Welcome to the Binger. Disney may have started with a mouse, but its animated movies are built on a legacy of princesses. Starting with 2009's The Princess and the Frog, Disney's made a concerted effort to make their princesses more independent. But that doesn't mean the origins behind their stories aren't any less messed up. In this video, we're exploring the folklore, fairy tales, and myths that Disney's most recent crop of princess movies are based on. These movies may seem like kids' stuff, but their original stories aren't so innocent. The Princess and the Frog was heralded as a return to form for Disney. It was the first hand-drawn animated film the company had produced since 2004, and the first princess film since 1998's Mulan. In addition, the company adapted the movie from a well-known Grimm's fairy tale. We all know the one about the Princess and the Frog, where a prince is cruelly turned into a frog and only true love's kiss can break the spell. So the prince hops through life searching for a woman who could see past his slimy green exterior. When he finally does, the woman kisses his froggy form and the prince transforms back into a human. Then the two live happily ever after. That all may sound familiar, but Grimm's version does not go exactly like that. The Grimm's tale is called The Frog King. It centers on a princess and a frog, but unlike Disney's Tiana, the tale's protagonist is already a princess when the story starts. She's the king's youngest daughter, and the thing she enjoys the most is playing with a golden ball. One day, the princess is playing with her ball by a well and it bounces inside. Heartbroken, the princess cries inconsolably until a frog comes along. He offers to retrieve her plaything from the deep well as long as she agrees to be his constant companion. The princess thinks that the frog is gross, but she agrees, figuring that there's no way the frog can hold her to her promise. The frog retrieves the ball, and as soon as it's in her hands, the princess runs off without him. By dinner time, though, the frog has reached the castle and demands the princess make good on her promise. The princess doesn't want to, but when the king finds out what happened, he insists that she follow through. So the princess is forced to share her meal with the frog. Then, even worse, she's forced to take him to her bedroom so he can share her bed. Once she's ushered him to her room, she tries to ignore him again, but he insists she lift him into bed with her. The princess finally has enough, so she picks the frog up and throws him against the wall. Yet after he hits the wall and falls to the ground, he transforms into a handsome prince. Looking at his human form, the princess decides she likes him after all. She agrees to be his companion, and the two get married. Disney's Princess and the Frog and the fairy tale most of us learn in grade school feature 100% less violence between the title couple. At some point in the story's history, the princess stopped throwing the frog prince at the wall and started kissing him instead. Also, Disney's twist on the story has Tiana turn into a frog too. So The Princess and the Frog is a very loose adaptation of the Grimm's tale. A year after The Princess and the Frog, Disney released 2010's Tangled. This was the film where Disney's princesses got completely computer animated, and they haven't looked back. Yet Tangled's origin story continued the tradition of looking to fairy tales from the past for story inspiration. Like The Princess and the Frog, Tangled is loosely based on a Grimm's fairy tale. This time, the team at Disney adapted Rapunzel for their movie. In the movie, Rapunzel is a princess who's kidnapped by Mother Gothel when she's a baby. In the Grimm's tale, Rapunzel came from much more humble beginnings. Her parents were commoners who happened to live next door to a sorceress. One day before Rapunzel was born, her mother got a great craving for the Rapunzel lettuce growing in the sorceress's garden. The woman insisted that she'd die if she didn't get some, so her husband broke into the garden and stole the leaves. Gothel catches him though, and to make amends for his treachery, she insists that the couple give her their child when she's born. So the couple have no choice but to hand off their daughter to Gothel and never see her again. Gothel names the baby Rapunzel after the plant all the fuss was about. In the fairy tale, it's unclear exactly why Gothel would want the child, or why she locks her up in a tower. Disney fixes that oversight by giving Rapunzel's hair magical properties that keep Gothel young. Another place where the fairy tale departs from the movie is with the male protagonist. The man who discovers Rapunzel in her tower in Tangled is Flynn Rider, a bandit with a heart of gold. In the Grimm story, the man who finds her is a prince. He falls in love with her after hearing her sing while he happens to be passing by. The prince calls up to her and Rapunzel pulls him up with her hair. Rapunzel hasn't seen a guy before, so at first sight she's scared. The prince is nice to her though, so she quickly agrees to marry him. The problem is, they don't know how to get Rapunzel out of the tower. so they keep seeing each other in secret until Rapunzel inadvertently mentions him to Gothel. Gothel is furious at Rapunzel's betrayal. She cuts off the girl's hair and takes her to a desolate place where Rapunzel gives birth to twins. Gothel then uses Rapunzel's chopped off hair to lure the prince in. Once she has him in the tower, she tells him he'll never find Rapunzel. In his horror, he falls off the building. On the way down, thorns scratch out his eyes and he goes blind. The prince wanders for years in devastation. Eventually, though, he somehow manages to find Rapunzel and their children. Rapunzel's so happy to see the prince that she cries. Some of her tears drop into his eyes, which magically heal them. After all that, Rapunzel and the nameless prince live happily ever after. In comparison, everything that Tangled's Rapunzel goes through doesn't seem so bad. Brave has the distinction of being the only princess movie ever made by Pixar, and its first film with a female-led character. Brave was an original story written by Brenda Chapman, who based the story on her own mother-daughter experiences. She also claimed that she was influenced by the fairy tales of Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen. Of course, those writers had nothing to do with the Scottish setting of the story. That could be why one of the reasons that Brave is the princess movie that seems to have the least obvious origin story. The story is set in 10th century Scotland, but filmmakers actually reference a hodgepodge of time periods. So while men covered themselves in body paint in the late Iron Age, women didn't wear corsets until the 16th century. Also, the 10th century may have been the last time that Scotland had bears. Some cultures feature bears in their folklore, but as far as historians know, Scotland isn't one of them. If Chapman was taking her cues from the brothers Grimm and Andersen, the idea of the queen turning into a bear may have come from them. Their stories feature a number of plots where a man turns into a bear. If anything, the most obvious story element Brave's creators took from folklore is the idea of the will-o-wisps. In Brave, Queen Eleanor tells Merida that, and that's what happens when Merida grows up and follows the wisps to the witch who help her change her fate. However, in the folk tales of the Scottish Highlands, the wisps weren't so helpful. They were lights that would recede from a traveler, leading them to danger and destruction. In comparison, turning into a bear might be the safer bet. Disney's Frozen was a smash hit when it came out in 2013, and it's easy to understand why. It's the story of two sisters whose bond helps them overcome every obstacle that stands in their way. And while there are men in the movie, the story focuses on the brave princesses at its center. Frozen is based on the fairy tale The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, but Frozen's Anna and Elsa aren't a whole lot like the characters in Andersen's story. Anna is a version of the tale's protagonist, Gerda. However, Anna is significantly older than Gerda, who Andersen describes as a little girl. Also, Gerda wasn't on a quest to find her sister. She didn't have any siblings. Instead, she was looking for her friend Kai. Plus, Gerda wasn't a princess and had no money to help her on her quest, while Anna has the means to enlist people to help her find Elsa. In addition, unlike Anna, Gerda had no idea where Kai went. He takes off with the evil Snow Queen after being infected by a demon mirror. The mirror gets in his eye and makes everything good and beautiful appear bad and ugly to him. At the same time, a shard of ice grew in his heart. So Kai was feeling no pain, but his perception of the world was turned on its head. As a result, Kai thought the evil Snow Queen seemed perfect and went with her willingly. In Frozen, Disney merged the characters of Kai and the Snow Queen to create Elsa. Of course, Elsa isn't evil like the Snow Queen, she just shares some of her powers. Still, just like Gerda eventually saved Kai from the Snow Queen, Anna eventually saves Elsa from, well, her own self-destructive tendencies. There's no Prince Hans or Kristoff in Andersen's story, and definitely no talking snowman named Olaf. In fact, most of the people who help Gerda on her journey are women. So even though Frozen is considered an unabashedly female-centric story, Andersen's tale has Frozen beat on that metric. There is a reindeer in The Snow Queen, like Frozen's Sven though. The reindeer plays a key role in the story. He lets Gerda ride on his back most of the way to the palace of the Snow Queen. The most recent Disney animated movie to feature a princess is 2016's Moana. Like Brave, Moana is an original story. However, the character of Maui is based on the mythology of the Pacific Islands. Maui is a prominent part of the lore on islands like Hawaii, Samoa, Tahiti, French Polynesia, and New Zealand. The myths differ from place to place, but there are stories of Maui doing things he brags about in the movie. And it turns out Maui did all of that. He was a trickster, but he went out of his way to help humans. In one of Hawaii's creation myths, Maui gave humans fire. And in the Polynesian mythology, he used his magical fishhook to yank the Hawaiian Islands out from under the ocean. A fishhook just like the one he uses in the movie. Maui also lassoed the sun until it agreed to let the islands have longer summer days. Of course, Disney's Maui isn't an exact replica of the mythological version. In Moana, Maui's an orphan who's raised by gods, but he's usually a god or a demigod in Polynesian legend. He also has 4 older brothers. One of the biggest controversies around Moana was the way Maui looked. Movie Maui was a hulk of a guy with untamed shoulder-length hair. However, in most myths, the character is a slim young man with a top knot. Also, while Maui makes it out of Moana just fine, he doesn't fare nearly as well in Polynesian legend. In that mythology, he meets a terrible demise. According to the story, Maui once again wants to help people, this time by making them immortal. So he turns himself into a worm and goes inside the body of the sleeping goddess of night and death. When he tries to leave though, the goddess wakes and bites Maui in half, ending his life. Yikes! We're kinda glad Disney decided to leave that story out of the movie. Which of these origin stories behind the most recent Disney princess movies did you find most surprising? Sound off in the comments. And before you go, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to The Binger for more awesome videos. Thanks for watching.